Hi, Professor Kist class. This is nancyohlin. Um, Hello, it's nice to meet you guys. I'm sorry I can't speak to you in person. I'm going to do the best I can answering your questions about writing and my book Consent using this method. I'm not like a YouTuber, so I'm not really used to doing this. So apologies if it seems a little bit awkward and I'm rambling and my cats are photobombing and so forth. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I've been an author for many decades. I started out my career doing ghostwriting for a very popular children's mystery series featuring a girl detective. Um, as with many ghostwriting gigs, I have to sign confidentiality clauses, so I can't really get into much detail about what I do and who I do this for. But you get the gist. So I've done a lot of ghostwriting. I've done a lot of what's called celebrity collaborations, where celebrities want to write a book and they hire me to work with them to do that. Um, I've written a lot of my own books for various ages, and I really love what I do. It's really hard, um, but it's very rewarding. I can't really imagine doing anything else with my life. And if you have any further questions about sort of writing or the industry, please feel free to email me through Professor Kist, and I'll do the best I can to answer your questions. All right, so let me jump into your questions about consent. First of all, thank you for reading it and having such a lively discussion and raising all these really good issues about it. Let me jump into that. So, first question from Beth. I enjoyed your book and thought it was well developed. Were there details and edits that did not make the book that you wish would have? Well, as soon as most writers write their books and it goes into production and becomes a book, they think, oh, I wish I would have done this instead, or changed this, or changed that. So one of the aspects of writing a book is, maybe some of you have done this already, but is to live with what you've written and not second guess too much. So of course, there are many things I wish I could have done differently, or details I would have changed, or whatever. But one specific example that's kind of interesting is that in the original version of Consent, I had scenes in there from the point of view of B's father when he was a law school student, and we also get to meet B's mother because she was an undergrad at that point. The two of them met in New York City on the street, and I really wanted to tell their love story leading up to the time when the mother loses her life when she's giving birth to B, and um, and that tragedy. I really wanted to sort of talk about where the dad and the mom came from, their story, and leading up to the beginning of B's story. I thought it was important, and sort of an important psychological layer of why B is the way she is and who she is. Um, and also explaining a little bit of the backstory of B's mother as a musician at Juilliard. But my editor at the time sort of thought that teenagers wouldn't really be interested in hearing about the mom and the dad because these are books for teens. So we cut them. In hindsight, I sort of wish I kept them in, but that's that. And I still have those scenes, and I'm glad I do. I really loved writing them. I really love getting to know those characters through writing them. Next question. Do you think your book Consent helps provide future or current teachers with an appropriate model for how to respond to these types of situations? This is from Avery, one of three questions. Let me take one at a time. So I didn't intend for Consent to provide future or current teachers with a model. I think a nonfiction book would do that. A nonfiction book should do that if it's about the issue of sexual consent and how teachers and students should handle those situations. But this is fiction. And for me, and I think a lot of YA authors, although obviously I can't speak for all of them, I think that with fiction, my responsibility, my job, my goal is to tell a story about a particular situation, a set of characters told from a particular point of view. It's just really meant to be one piece of the issue of consent, but it's more than that. It's about more than consent. It's the character Beatrice's story, and so, as with any story, I hope that it challenges readers. I hope it makes them think, inspires them, but I want them to come to their own conclusions. I don't really want to tell my readers how to think or what to think about various subjects through my work. I would like to inspire them and challenge them and make them uncomfortable and make them think about these things. But most of all, I want them to come to their own conclusions, whether teachers are reading these books or students or parents or anybody. That all being said, this is a book for teenagers. It's not meant to be for teachers or parents. It's for teenagers. One thing that I found with teenagers and YA literature in general is that teenagers don't like being lectured to. They don't like being told what to think. They don't like being told through a novel, drugs are bad or drinking is bad. They like to come to their own conclusions, as they should. And I think these stories, hopefully these YA stories that I write and other people write, are books that teenagers can connect to. They can read these things and see themselves maybe in the characters or not, but hopefully these books will lead them to think about the issue. If my book were nonfiction, that would be another thing altogether. If this were a guidebook regarding the topic of sexual consent, or a manual or a history, absolutely there should be a lot more material that's pedagogical and didactic, frankly. But in this case, because it's a novel, especially a novel for teenagers, I really want the readers to come to their own conclusions, whatever that means. What caused you to write a story about this topic? Well, so I had a similar experience when I was in high school. Not similar in the sense I did not have a relationship with a teacher, but I was a victim of sexual assault. And I started out wanting to write a book about the experience, very straightforwardly. And in fact, I have another draft of a different book that I wrote about the experience. Sort of sexual assault is very bad, and the person who's the sexual assaulter is very bad, and the victim is the victim, which is all true in a situation like that. But once I started writing that novel, and then I sort of put it aside, I started with B's story, a separate story, again, trying to come at it with the same perspective. And then it kind of changed course in the middle of writing it. It became a lot more complicated. And I realized, first of all, and this sounds really spacey, but my characters tend to sort of take over when I'm writing, and that's right for me. Again, super spacey, but it's just my process. But I also realized that I wanted to write a book about the issue of sexual consent from the perspective of a teenager who thinks she's in love. I think that's a lot more interesting than complicated, at least for me creatively, than to write a story where there's like a bad sexual assaulter and the victim and, justice happens. Of course, that's how it should be in real life if such a thing happened. But in a story, a novel, I really wanted to see what a teenager would think about this issue, especially with all the nuances and complexities of sexual consent laws and policies. I really wanted a teenager reading it, and also the teenager, the character of B, to be wrangling with things like, well, why is it that it's okay for me to have, a sexual relationship with someone in, this state when I'm 16, but not in another state, because then I have to be 18. I really wanted to go through a teenager's sort of mind about these kinds of things, especially through the lens of what she thinks is romantic love. Anyway, that's that. So Avery also says, did you intend for future educators to read this book, or was it meant for a young audience? I sort of addressed that a minute ago. It's definitely meant for a young audience. And again, it's definitely not meant for future educators, although I'm glad that you future educators are reading it and talking about it. I think that's wonderful. All right, next question from Joanna. At the end of the novel, B does not regret her decision to have sex with a teacher. What was the benefit of concluding the novel without a realization that what she was doing was wrong? This goes back a little bit to what I said before about not being didactic, not preaching, not telling readers what to think. As you have noticed, this entire novel is from the perspective of B. It's only her voice. And to some degree, I want you guys to think of her as an unreliable narrator. We're getting the whole story from her side. Very little from other people. And whatever we're getting from the other people, we're getting through the lens of B. So I want the reader to question. I want the reader to read all along and come to their own conclusions, think, be inspired to think about B's thoughts and actions. Um, I don't want to end the novel with B saying, "Oh my gosh, what I did was wrong," you know, and I hope you readers walk away with that message. Readers will walk away with whatever message that they walk away with after reading this. Um, and again, I don't want to insult readers by sort of delivering the message in a nice little shiny package. I trust the intelligence of readers, young, middle, and old, to sort of read this novel and walk away from it thinking what they're thinking, concluding what they're concluding, regardless of the rightness or wrongness of this situation. Yeah. Okay. So, is it Diara? I hope I'm spelling your name wrong, unless it's misspelled and it's Diana. But and I apologize if I'm getting your name wrong. Question: if you were to rewrite this book all over again, what would you change? Characters, ending, etc. I never, I never asked myself that question. I think I mentioned a minute ago that writers always want to go back and redo, and there's no redo. So once I write a book, I tend to move on. Every once in a while, I'll reread a book I wrote a while back, and I'll either think, "Oh wow, this is really good," or "Oh my God, how could I have written this?" So so that. So if I had to rewrite the book over again, what would I change? Characters, ending, probably nothing, because it's what it is. It's what I wrote at the time, and it was the right thing to write at the time for me. I certainly wouldn't change it substantively. I wouldn't change anything substantively. More like tweaking sentences here and there. Okay, Amanda. I would like her, me I guess, to go into more detail as to why she didn't have B and Dane continue their relationship after B entered Juilliard. I was also curious why I didn't go in more detail in regards to Beatrice and her brother's relationship. I think it would have been nice to learn more about their conflicts and have them resolve their conflict in the story. All right, thanks for asking that, Amanda. So it's interesting. I got a ton of emails from readers saying, what happened to B and Dane after B went to Juilliard? I really wanted this to be B's story. The point of this novel was not the relationship between them, although obviously that's a huge part of it. I wanted this story to be about B's story. I don't know what happens to B and Dane after she enters Juilliard. I really don't. I left B at Juilliard. I left Dane at New England Conservatory, which is in Boston. And as you guys may or may not remember, right, so the Schumann fantasy is a big part of their story. And this whole idea of Schumann writing two different variations on the fantasy, one of which has a secret code of love for his Clara Schumann. And at the very end of my book, Dane gives her B a copy of this version of the fantasy that has encoded in it this sort of love message. So we're clear on what he feels about her. So she looks at it and she kind of reacts to it, and then she sets it aside. And then she starts a new piece by Schubert. She resets. And I really wanted to get that across. Again, not didactically, not obviously, not hitting the reader over the head, but I wanted this to be about her moving on with her life as an adult, being at the place where she's supposed to be, becoming the musician she's supposed to be. She puts aside the Schumann and starts with Schubert and goes on. And I wanted the sense of, I wanted the sense of sort of her moving on to the next phase of her life. I'm not sure what happens to B and Dane. It's sort of not relevant to my story, at least within the pages of that book. And as to why Beatrice's relationship with her brother, I put in as much as I wanted to about that relationship. It was a troubled relationship, obviously. They're both troubled people in a lot of ways because of the family situation. I wanted to put him in as much as I did and show what they were like. And again, at the very end, if you recall, he texts her and wishes her luck at Juilliard. And that's about the most he can give her at that time in their lives, but it's something. He reaches out. So that's that. Okay, Abby asks, did you craft this work to be read individually or as a class? How do you think parents would react to their children being assigned this reading material for school? This is very much meant to be read individually. It's not meant to be a class book, but if a teacher, whether in high school or college or in another setting, chooses to assign it, as Professor Kist did, that's fine with me because I trust that that teacher would know what's right for the students and would aim the discussion in an appropriate way. I can't speak to how parents would react. I suspect some parents would be fine with it and some parents would not be fine with it, as with a lot of books that have controversial subject matters. But again, I trust teachers to assign what they're assigning, but mostly this book is really meant to be read individually. Recently at a literary event, this is an aside, I met a woman whose job it is to go around to college campuses speaking to small groups, especially of women, about the issue of sexual consent and Title IX issues. And when she found out that I'd written this book, she didn't know my book. She got really excited. She said, "I'm going to assign this to, all the girls that I speak to and all the young women because this book is very complicated, which is how the issue should be discussed. It's a complicated issue." So I was glad for that. Anyway, Julie, did I ever consider writing any part of the book or an epilogue from Dane's perspective? I feel as though there's so much there that could have added to the story. That's an interesting idea. Yes, possibly. Maybe someday I'll write a book from Dane's perspective. But consent just really was Bee's story, and I really wanted everybody to be in Bee's head very much. Okay, Mackenzie, if I had to rewrite this story, but through a male student's perspective, what are some big ways that I think this story would be different? What elements may stay the same? I can't say. Again, this book was meant to be about Bee, who's a woman, a young woman. If I decided to write about a male student, it would have depended very much on who that student was, what that character was about. Obviously, societally speaking, especially with the Me Too movement, there's although the Me Too movement isn't exclusive to female victims, but obviously there are things one can say about gender imbalances in our society, how girls and women are victimized or disenfranchised versus men and boys. But if I ever chose to sort of tackle it from that perspective, it would be a different story. And again, I can't sort of generically say what my story would have been like if it had been a boy instead of a girl. I don't know. It would really depend on the story and on the character. And again, I like to think that I would write something that's not generic, that's not meant to apply to everybody in sort of a stereotypical or generalized sense. I would be very specific to that character, the characters that I'm writing, and see what comes out of that. Okay, Ethan, in light of the Me Too and Time's Up movements, would you approach the story of consent in a different way today? Again, I sort of harken back to some of the other answers I gave. This book was very much this book. I wrote it at the time I wrote it, and B was my character, and as were Dane and the other characters. And the story that sort of grew out of who they were as characters, that's the story I ended up with. It's really hard for me to say, well, what would I write today in light of the Me Too and Time's Up movements? I can't really say, well, if I wrote consent today, would it be different? Maybe it would be different, I'm not sure. But it's what it was. And it's not as though now that the Me Too movement has happened, which I'm really glad for, I would have gotten sort of more didactic or harder on Dane or harder on, the whole situation. I don't know. I really don't. I don't think so. Because, if I started today writing a different book, coming out of the sort of the gestalt of the time. Is that the right word, gestalt? The climate, the vibe of the time. It would be a different book. It wouldn't be consent at all. It would be completely different. Okay, Lexi, what was the overall message you wanted your readers to walk away with? Did you find it hard to write from a high school girl's perspective as an adult? What was your hardest scene to write in this book? the overall message, as I mentioned earlier, I didn't want anybody to walk away with any message whatsoever. This is not a message book. Again, it's fiction. I wanted them to walk away feeling sort of challenged and maybe uncomfortable and curious and also inspired by Bee's own story. She ended up at Juilliard, and she's going to become a great pianist like her mother was, and her mother was supposed to be. And that should be inspiring, I hope, but no real message, so to speak, except maybe, no message. Okay. Did you find it hard to write from a high school girl's perspective? Well, that's what young adult literature is about. Young adult literature tends to be written by adults versus teens. And as with any character, unless you're writing a character that's sort of modeled after you, you're always writing about someone who's not you. Writing a woman writing from a man's perspective, right? A straight person writing from a gay person's perspective. You're getting into head sets and personalities and being in someone else's body and brain. That's the job of an author. Now I'm sounding didactic, sorry. So no, it wasn't any harder than creating any other characters. And I like writing from teenage perspectives because I remember very vividly what it was like to be a teenager. I also think that being a teenager is like this amazing time. It's great and it's awful and it's confusing and interesting, and it's this bridge between being a child and being an adult. I think it's a really rich world to set a novel in. What was the hardest scene to write in this book? There were a lot of scenes that were difficult. I have to say that one of the hardest scenes was the scene with when Bee and Dane first get together in that motel in New York. I think that's where my own squeamishness about that kind of a relationship, my own discomfort and even pain came into it. It was hard to write that scene because I knew I had to do it justice. I knew it had to be a very real scene from Bee's eyes. None of my squeamishness could come into it because it was Bee's scene, not my scene. So, and I also just find in general when I'm writing YA, when I'm writing, say, and this doesn't apply to consent, but generally speaking, if I'm writing from, say, the bad guy's perspective or, the evil person or the bad girl or whatever, it's hard for me to write those scenes because I can't write them from the perspective of being all high and mighty and moral about it. I have to be in their heads. I have to just think, well, what is it like to be this person who's committing a crime or who's doing the wrong thing or who's cruel. So again, this is not about consent, but that thought applies to consent. I have to write that scene honestly and truly from Bee's perspective, not mine. And so that was a tough one. And there were other hard scenes to write in that book. It was a tough book to write. Okay, Chloe. Also, do you ever intend to further this book into a series? I have many questions about Bee. Does she ever get help with her compulsivity to writing or mourning her mother's death? No, it was never an intention to make it into a series. Does she get help for her compulsive lying? Maybe she gets therapy at Juilliard. Mourning her mother's death, the same. I like to think that some of her actions throughout the novel were processing the mourning of her mother's death. I mean, she actually sits down at the piano and starts actually letting herself be a pianist, which she wouldn't let herself do. And she starts telling the truth sometimes. So I like to think it's a process, and that as Bee kind of grows beyond these pages, she'll accept more and more of these things and process and get therapy and, become an adult, become more accepting of herself. Okay, Emily, after the events of the book, now that it would be legal, do you think they would ever consider being together? I get asked that a lot, and maybe. I don't know. I really don't. As I said, I sort of, I imagine what happens to them after the book ends, but I don't know. And for me, my happy place is seeing Bee sitting at that piano lesson where she sets the Schumann aside and picks up the Schubert and kind of starts her destiny. That's my happy place with that book, and I never sort of think very much beyond that. Ashley, if Dane was so instrumental in B's future, what is the author saying about their relationship? Was their relationship acceptable? I am saying absolutely nothing about that. I'm not saying that it was acceptable or not acceptable. I think I was presenting it, I was putting it all out there, all of the dimensions, all the complications, because I think often that's what it's like in life, right? Obviously, in life, there are a lot of situations where it is black and white. There's no other answer besides whatever that answer is. With this relationship, this fictional relationship, I could take liberties and provide whatever details I wanted about who they were, what they were. Yes, he did help her, which was a good thing. But he was her teacher, and what he did was illegal and against school policy. And sort of in general, one could think a little bit creepy. But she loved him. She was in love with him. So, right, there's all these different aspects to it. It gets complicated, and it's all true in a way. And again, I would never say their relationship is acceptable or not acceptable. I didn't want to come to those conclusions, and I didn't want to deliver those kinds of conclusions to my reader on a silver platter. I want you all to think about it for yourselves and, come away with whatever conclusions you come away with, and maybe not come away with any conclusions. Maybe be really confused, which is awesome, because I think confusion is one of the great things that a good book can produce. Okay, I think I've answered all the questions. If I missed anything, Professor Kist, please let me know, and I'd be happy to answer more. Anyway, again, thank you so much for reading the book. Thank you for having a heated discussion about it. And I feel good that you guys are all future teachers. I think you guys are going to be awesome and bring a lot of enlightenment and confusion to your pupils, I hope. Okay, thank you, and bye-bye.